action that actually has a real stake in resolving those crises, the housing crisis and the future environmental crisis. And that's why we think Brigid is the ideal candidate, because she's not somebody who's going to talk about the issues. She's a young worker who's directly confronting and faced with those problems, and she's an activist. She's not just somebody who talks. She's been actively involved in environmental campaigning, in campaigning for workers' rights, and in campaigning for affordable and public housing to be built, and for rent controls and protections for tenants. So she is the ideal candidate. We need real change and people who have a stake in the future, and Brigid Purcell is precisely the candidate who I think can give us that type of change, a new perspective for the generation that are facing these enormous problems.
Brigid, you might maybe have your say.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I'm running the election to break up the cycle of Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. I'm part of Generation Rent. It's we're not gonna be able to get our own homes due to not being able to save for a deposit because of the high rents. Just not being able to earn enough to secure a mortgage in the first place. There's not a hope of any of us being able to, and we're also filling the most amount of low income jobs, so there's not a hope of us earning enough to be able to get a house in the first place. So we're just going to be stuck in this cycle of renting and going nowhere.
What are some of your solutions to that?
Real rent control, not just a rent freeze, but a real rent control that brings your rent in line with your income level. So if you're on a lower wage, you pay a lower rent. We need to completely ban vulture and cuckoo funds like they've done in New Zealand. We need to use public land to build public housing and affordable housing. The Land Development Agency is not a solution to that. It's just handing over our land over to developers who got us into this problem in the first place, building luxury apartments that nobody lives in. We need to establish a state-run construction company to build high-quality housing, so we don't end up having mica disasters throughout the country. They're my solutions.
So I suppose the real crux of your campaign is housing. That's the main issue.
Housing, environmental issues like cleaning up Dublin Bay because of the pollution that the Ringsend water treatment plant pumping sewage into the bay, and it's making people sick now. That needs to change. Also workers' rights, particularly. I'm a worker. I have made all the money I've ever made in my life has come from working low income jobs, and so I'm acutely aware of the kind of lack of protection afforded to people working service industry jobs. I've been a waitress, a bartender, I've been a cleaner, I've been a cashier. I've done a lot of those kind of jobs. I've seen 0-hour contracts, wage theft, bosses stealing your tips. I've seen verbal, physical and sexual assault happening to employees. It's something that directly impacts me. I know exactly what it's like to feel like you're stuck in that position of you can't leave the job, but that's the only job you got, and you're just going to have to put up with the conditions. I know how that feels.
You've seen sexual assault happen to employees?
It's happened to me at work. Yeah.
That's awful.
Yeah. It's not great. But it's when you're working in those kind of industries, it's a given that it's going to happen to you, and that there's something fundamentally wrong with a situation where that's just seen as that happened to you as well. Yeah, same here. First week, it's going to happen. And
was that in a particular sector, or was it a particular job that you were doing?
It was the hospitality sector.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And was that somebody that was more senior than you, or?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that's very difficult to deal with, and I suppose, how do you tackle that issue in the workplace?
You offer firmer protections for workers. That's how you do that. That's it. We don't have those protections at the moment, and we need to have them.
And do you think young people are maybe more easier targets because they're seen as, well, they'll work whatever hours, we can treat them however we want?
Absolutely. And you see that in the wages as well. If you're coming in, I mean, even like the minimum wage, we don't have a minimum wage for people. The minimum wage that we have doesn't come in if you're under 20. Like, a 19-year-old could be working a full-time job and they should be paid at least the minimum wage, but that's not applicable until they're 20 years old. You know, it's there's a lot of issues when it comes to wages. 10.20 is not enough to get by in Dublin. It's you know, the cost of living here is 11.90, and we're paying such huge rents, and the cost of living is astronomical. That, like, obviously we need to be bumping that up to what we think is €15.
Yeah.
You should be able to live comfortably. That's everybody has that right.
And you've been involved in the party for a year. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Mm-hmm.
That's quick,
Yeah,
isn't it?
I know.
To go from just starting to become. So I suppose what motivated you to seek the nomination as your role?
Well,
And how did it all get? It's a very quick progression. Isn't it?
I know. So what happened was I was picketing with the Debenhams workers, and I saw that people before profit were always there.
And were
I
you
had
a
been
Debenhams worker or no?
No, I was a supporter. I had been laid off because of COVID. I had a lot of free time, and the restrictions had lifted, so I was like, well, look, I'm just going to support some fellow workers. It's something that matters a lot to me, so I'm going to pop down and show my support. And people before profit were always there, and I was like, lads, I guess I'll join. I see enough as it is. So I joined, and it's just kind of, you know, getting more and more involved with the work that they did. We opened a branch in Ringsend, and I became the convener of that. Because, you know, we finally had enough people in Ringsend to warrant opening a branch, and it's just kind of taken up from there. And obviously the Owen Murphy's resignation was a surprise, but I feel like I'm supported enough by the party that I'm not intimidated by it. It's exciting, and we'll see what happens.
How do you feel about your chances?
Well, that's a 100% increase.
Yes, that's what I was saying, yes.
I'm
What's the phrase to use? Exponential. Yeah.
Exponential growth. That's what it is, exactly. I'm not worried about it. I think there's a lot of anger, particularly with people in my generation, and I think it's a matter of mobilising young people, particularly like renters who, you know, their vote's still in Cavan, and you're like, lads, you haven't voted in Cavan in 6 years. Come on, right. Move your vote back down. You've been here for ages. Come on. It's a matter of motivating renters and motivating, you know, a lot of people who feel like they're left behind by the establishing parties, because they have been.
And can I just ask? I had a story just last week that it was actually there's 3 parties that are running either current or former landlords in the by-election. Do you think that it's a good idea for a political party to run either a current landlord or a former landlord in a constituency like Dublin Bay South?
Absolutely not. I don't think so. The Dublin Bay South has, I think, we have like almost half of our constituents are renters. So it means that the vast majority of those people are not being represented properly, because, you know, a landlord doesn't. Not all landlords, but like the interests of a landlord are very different to the interests of a renter.
Yeah.
And you can see it with like the likes of the RTB and how that's set up, and how, you know, it's heavily stacked towards landlords and it doesn't offer real protection for renters. And I am of the opinion that there should be more renters in the Dáil. There's a lot of renters in the country, and the Dáil should start kind of reflecting the demographics of the country.
All right. Okay. Super. Best of luck.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I don't think I introduced myself. Gabby is my
Gabby,
with the Irish Independent.
Yeah.
I think I spoke to you on the phone.
Yeah.